Imagine, if you will, you were locked up. You're chained to the floor in a police interrogation room. You're sick. You're a heroin addict. You're withdrawing. You're a little confused. You've definitely broken the law, but what do they know? In comes the chief of police, Burke. He comes and he's furious. He punches you. His goons, his two officers that he calls his knights, start smacking you. How would you feel? This exact situation happened in 2012 in Suffolk County, Long Island. The man's name was Christopher Loeb, and in 2012, he had stolen a duffel bag from Burke's car. In that duffel bag was some really degenerate items. Burke, obviously, being as corrupt as he was furious that anyone would dare steal from him. And he violated Christopher Loeb's rights. This story happened on Long Island in 2012. This ties in to the Long Island serial killer case. As a true crime show and a Long Islander, I want to cover this story. Sergeant Burke first got his first taste of being in the limelight and in power. He was in high school and he was a witness to a major murder that happened back in the late 70s. We have Thomas Spota. He became the district attorney for several decades here on Long Island, starting in 2001 till his downfall for the incident that we just discussed. Thomas Spota was just a local prosecutor at that point on this major murder case. Sergeant Burke was his star witness. Problem with this is that at the time, there is a anonymous source that says Burke, as a teenager, was selling drugs and extorting drugs and money from other dealers. He was also doing B&Es. So his corruption started at a young age. But being the star witness of Thomas Spota, this formed a relationship built on corruption. Back then, it said that Sergeant Burke was a young hoodlum. All right, he was breaking into houses, he was dealing drugs, and it made him a very unreliable witness because this was brought up. However, Thomas Spota never forgot it, and this started his rise. Sergeant Burke would actually tell people that he wanted to become a police officer so he could get away with crimes. This is at 14 years old. He knew that he wanted to be a corrupt cop. Let's fast forward a little bit now. All right, so now he is a cop. You would think that someone like this, he's got that mindset, he would get caught. And he did. In 1993, he was found to be having sex with prostitutes in his car, in uniform. All right, that's a big no-no. Carried on a relationship with one of these prostitutes. However, they're out to dinner, and Sergeant Burke and this prostitute, she says that she forgot something. And he allows her to take his vehicle, which contained all his equipment, his service revolver, or service pistol, I should say, handcuffs, the whole works. She takes the car back to Wyandanch, and she proceeds to smoke crack and never come back. Totally forgot about him. Eventually, Burke had to call one of his partners to come pick him up, and the two of them show up at the house that she's smoking crack in. All right, and then Internal Affairs started investigating this. We got the Freedom of Information Act request that lays this all out. The woman in question, the prostitute, she completely avoided the Internal Affairs office. You know, she claimed that she was living out of a hotel, and then she moved back to this place and just completely avoided it. They brought her out because they wanted to do a polygraph, because this prostitute was saying that James Burke didn't do drugs, didn't give her drugs, and they wanted to know if this was true. They didn't find her to be a credible source, so they want to know how deep did the corruption go. He was already in violation, and, you know, it was conduct that was unbecoming of a police officer, but, you know, were the rumors of him shaking down dealers and giving her drugs and using drugs true? The only way for them to find out was to do the polygraph exam. And in 1994, that happened. So what is interesting is Sergeant Burke denied that she ever used his personal car or his patrol car, but she said that she did, and he denies it. And we know that she passed this polygraph, so it's kind of interesting that his story differs from hers, even when she was trying to help him. She also stated that she stands by everything that she said in that polygraph, which we know came out truthful. However, we do know that people can lie on those and get away with them, and that's why they're not used in a court of law. But it seems by everyone's accounts that James Burke did not use drugs. All right, he was a raging narcissist sex addict, but he was not a drug addict. Big whoop. So I'd like to read this small portion of the Freedom of Information. I think it's kind of telling. All right, so upon completion of that polygraph examination, Rickenbacker was asked to submit a second examination. They found that her answers in regards to the drugs were true, that he had not used, did not proclaim, did not give her any, drugs, and so that part was true. All right, so when they asked her for the second examination concerning her relationship with Sergeant Burke, she declined. And the reason was, she said that the answers to the first polygraph exam regarding the drugs were truthful and could only help him. However, the answers regarding to the relationship could only hurt him. And she did not want to hurt him. So she refused to give an examination on that second one. In fact, everyone involved basically had positive things to say about Sergeant Burke. This is on the street level. All the, prostitutes or street people, gangs, drugs. He had a good rapport. Obviously, this would be something that would be beneficial as a street cop, working that area. So it kind of makes sense, but they talked highly of him. However, it seems that he may have taken this type of relationship way over the top. In a Vice article, you also get anonymous sources talking about how he would actually, through these prostitutes, shake down local drug dealers. He would take drugs, he would take money, and there's some evidence that while he didn't use the drugs, he was completely sex obsessed. All right, so this is a criminal with a badge, basically. Now you gotta wonder, how would someone that was investigated for this, and luckily through, his connections and the police unions, he kept his job, how would he become the top brass? That's where Thomas Spota comes in. Thomas Spota, like we said before, was very close with Sergeant Burke. Some people said he had blinders on. I call BS on that. All right, you don't have blinders on that. That's just you not wanting to see. All right, it's convenient now, I'm sure, to say that you didn't know, but you knew. Let's be honest. People talk. You ever worked an office job, or let's say any type of job, and people gossip? You think people didn't gossip about this and that it didn't get back to the top prosecutor? I doubt that. Going back to that 1979 case with the Pius girl, it is amazing to find out that years later, starting in 1982, and even more recent as the 2000s, there's been several case studies that went into deep diving to see if that case was properly tried. There was 4 boys that were convicted, and obviously this was at Burke's word. And they found that they really don't believe the 4 boys that were arrested and convicted did this crime. They believe he's innocent. So his corruption, knows no bounds, even at a young age. This is who we're dealing with. Now, what's amazing is back in 1979, some of this corruption seemed to be prevalent then too. All right, so back then in 1979, Suffolk County had a 97% confession rate, which is actually double than the national average. So there were actual cases that they were saying that they beat it out of them. Taking books, phone books, big phone books, and putting it over them and smashing rocks against the phone book. That way it didn't leave a mark, but believe me, you felt that. In that same Vice article, they talk about a suspect who said that the police tied a string with a piece of paper to his penis and put the penis... 2012, Christopher Loeb, that local heroin addict, he would break into cars at night. All right, so just like any heroin addict, he's on that hamster wheel, following the carrot. He has to get the money to get, fight off the sickness. He does not want to be sick. It's a cyclic and terrible. It's hard to break.
Long story short, I found out that there was a detective that lived in my neighborhood that was a part of the task force that was stealing drugs from the crime scenes. And I thought it would be a good idea to look for this guy's house and find out if in fact he had drugs.
So at night, he would sneak out dressed all in black, and he would try to handle the car. If the car opened, let's see what we can grab. He walks up on Sergeant Burke's home. He sees the car. It's a 2008 Yukon, pulls on the handle, and it opens. He finds a duffel bag. Inside the duffel bag, you find the stuff that you would find on any officer. You know, regular handcuffs, his pistol. However, he also found stuff that you would never expect to be found in the same area of a police officer's personal bag. He found porn, you know, DVD of really sick type of degenerate porn. All right, so it would be like a snuff film. All right, he found a masked man torturing a woman. All right, that's believed to be a prostitute. There was also CP. All right, so if you don't know what CP is, don't Google it either. A proclivity for young boys, let's put it that way. Very disgusting and degenerate stuff. Whether it's true or not, we can't tell. And really, it's kind of the Suffolk County Police Department's own fault. All right, so part of that Freedom of Information Act, they talked about how they broke protocol by going in, allowing Sergeant Burke to go into the suspect's house, Christopher Loeb's house, and gather evidence, gather his stuff. So we don't know what he took out and what he brought out of there by himself. Remember, these are the same police officers that allowed them to abuse Christopher Loeb when he was chained up. So in my mind, Sergeant Burke must have went in there and grabbed, you know, the most incriminating stuff and only leaving the stuff that, you know, he wanted to be found. Why else would you walk into a suspect's house and gather your personal belongings? That just would not be allowed for anyone. Anyone. Police officer, sergeant, chief of police, unless you're the president of the United States, but even then, you just don't go into a suspect's house and gather your personal belongings. So Christopher Loeb says the stuff that was gathered out of there was, like I said, the degenerate porn. All right, so Christopher Loeb said it's degenerate porn, frilly pink handcuffs, among other stuff. It was just kind of really gross stuff. All right, that's the bottom line. Snuff films and all. Now, the way it goes down, Sergeant Burke was not the only person that was breaking protocol. So Sergeant Burke goes in and grabs the evidence. Meanwhile, his officers outside, they're roughening Christopher Loeb up. All right, they're throwing him to the ground. They're telling him about the hot shot, about raping his mother. And when his mother actually did arrive, that's the time where they started acting more normal. They finally brought him in and brought him to the precinct. I'm sure at that point he was pretty scared. All right, I would be. You know, you don't know what's going to happen if these guys are willing to do that in broad daylight on at your house. All right. At that point, Sergeant Burke walks in. That's when Christopher Loeb, you know, being mad, calls him a pedophile. Sergeant Burke, not used to being questioned, especially not in his precinct, comes in, and that's where he punches him.
Every time I asked for a lawyer, I got hit again, I got choked, I got punched, I got slapped, I got kicked.
Chained and defenseless, his civil rights violated.
So Christopher Loeb obviously antagonized, but that does not give you an excuse to strike a victim like that or strike a criminal like that. You just can't. So it gets worse because Sergeant Burke felt untouchable. All right, so if you're a Long Islander, you probably know about Oheka Castle. This is a nice catering hall type place, and they threw the cops a fancy party for the end of the year. At this party, it was said that Sergeant Burke at the bar was loudly, you know, proclaiming that he was proud of everyone for what happened, you know, with this incident, and the bartender heard about it, and he just didn't care who heard him. He felt that, you know, he was protected, he was insulated, and he said that it reminded him of the old days. The old days, okay? So like what we were talking about with the phone bill and the penis in the shredder. So I guess maybe there's some truth to that.